Hey, what's going on guys? This is Ryan again and welcome to a new video. First, I'd like to thank all of you who stopped by, either during one of my lectures or game reviews during the US Go Congress. It really means a lot to me when you guys say you support our channel, and some of you also gave me some feedback that was really interesting. They had also I'm always learning something from when I talk with you guys, so thank you so much for stopping by. Now, the 3-3 invasion video was relatively well received, and there were a lot of requests to make more. So today I thought of something else to rant about, and that's the 3-4 and low approach. So today that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I'll just go over some of the basic concepts and trying to keep it simple so that it's applicable to players of most levels. So without further ado, let's go right into the video. Before talking about the low approach, I'd like to just briefly mention the other ways of approaching the corner. Now, white can, let's go back a bit. So, white can do a high approach, 2 space high, 2 space low, and 1 space low approach. So, the 2 space approaches are situational. So today I won't go into too much detail about that. They really depend on what's happening around, and they're relatively more rare. So first let's talk about the high approach. Typically black will attach, and if white blocks, black can pull back. When you have 2 stones on the 4th line, the 3rd line attached under is a very good way of snatching territory, because if white hanes, then when black cuts, locally this fight is very difficult for white most of the time. So typically white will have to hane on the outside. When black pulls back, white has to connect, and then when black extends, white will extend, either low or high. So this is a pretty, I think it's a pretty common joseki these days, and I think most of you already know this. So why do people think this is good for black now? So this is not, bad for white, but more and more pros prefer to play this local variation as the black stones. So there are 2 reasons for this, and the first one being that locally black has a lot of territory. So if we count up to the 5 line, all the way over until the D line, and including the D line, we can count 15 points for black, and that's quite a big corner. And white is only controlling about 8 or 9 points. So there's considerably more territory for black than white. But of course white has much more influence. The second reason that more and more players like black more is because black has sente. And in the opening, it's really important to choose sente joseki, because in Go, when you play the first move in an empty area, you should be able to get a better result than your opponent. That's kind of like the general rule. And when you can play fast, and fast meaning you can take the first move in more and more places, then it's considered better. And this is a really important concept for those of you who are looking to improve your openings, is that actually many players play openings that are too slow, and if you let your opponent take more areas, it's very easy and quick to fall behind. And this is exactly what black is trying to do, is do a fast opening and keep white in gote. So, for those two reasons, nowadays, white, it's rarer for white to do the one space high approach. Okay, so of course it's it's still playable for white. I don't want to get that into your mindset, but it's just typically it's easier to handle for pros if you're the territorial style, and you can take the territory and reduce your opponent's influence later. It's almost like the 3-3 kind of mindset. So, can white resist? If white extends and blocks, then black will usually play the small avalanche. And if you've seen my small avalanche video, there's no option for white, and this variation is considered good for black. And this variation is very complicated, so I will put a link to that video in the description so you guys can go ahead and look at that one. So this is typically, so now this is why white doesn't really approach high very often in pro games, is you don't really want to give black that much territory. If you're an influence player, then by all means the high approach is still for you. But if you're more territorial player, and if you don't like your opponent building up cash early, then the low approach is a different path to go. Now, I'm going to talk about three things, starting from the simplest one first. So I will talk about the Kosumi. So basically there are three areas black can play now. Either here, or one move on the other side, or a pincer move. For example, the two-space high pincer. So let's talk about this one, because I think it's the simplest. And since we already talked about the high approach, it's a nice comparison. So this is the joseki after black plays the Kosumi and does the one-space extension. The reason why black typically does the one-space instead of the two-space in this shape is because white stones are strong, black should also make stronger shape. Although the two-space extension is the best in most cases, because white is too strong, and the two-space would leave quite a few forcing moves here and weaknesses for white. So the one space is the correct move. And then white will extend. So after this joseki, you might notice that black's territory is a bit less, and also there's a lot more aji to it. So the corner is weaker. Aji meaning kind of potential due to weaknesses. So for example, when white has this stone, there is this weakness. And if black has to connect and let white to connect back, then this corner would be made a lot smaller than it was before. So that's the typical kind of variation here. And if you compare it to the high approach, white is a bit better because black's corner is weaker, has a bit less territory, while for white it makes less difference, right? If I just make that shape on the right side, we can compare the right side versus the left side. We can see that white is a bit stronger with this turn, but black has more territory, and also the corner has a lot less weaknesses. So the idea with this Kosumi is, again, to take sente. And that's a very important concept in the opening again. but I think, well, in my opinion, black takes a slight loss in the corner. Not everyone will agree with this, but it is clear that this is worse than the high approach and attachment joseki. So if you want sente and give white the right side, then this is the joseki you want. A good example of a situation where black may want to play this is, for example, if white had, let's say, we have a white corner here, and we have this joseki. So I've quickly played out a joseki, which is a variation where it's considered even result for both sides. Now in this case, black might want to do this because the right side is unideal for developing, and if black can force white to there, then that would be a bad direction for white, and black can take sente to play elsewhere in the opening. So that would be an example where black would choose this joseki in the lower left. So let's go back now and talk about the other two. So what's the difference between Kosumi and knight's move? So let's talk about the Kosumi first. The Kosumi is a very strong shape. When you play a diagonal, the two stones are already connected, because when white plays one side, you always play the other. This is also the reason why empty triangles are so bad, because when you have an empty triangle, you're already playing one of the diagonal areas without white having a stone there, which makes the shape redundant and non-efficient. So after the Kosumi, the cornerstone is very strong, so it's harder for white to get anything from attaching. So after the Kosumi, typically white extends. And the next layer of questions is the 2-space extension better or the 3-space extension better? And some of you might be wondering why white would play the 3-space extension. So the 3-space extension was the move that was present in old joseki books, and this was considered the best move. It's not afraid of the invasion at the moment because white could attach, and if black hanes, white would extend, and then if black protects, white would capture the stone. So you can view this as kind of like a follow-up to the original joseki. So the joseki was actually only 4 moves. Black can invade to force white, make the upper side strong, and white captures the stone, obviously, will gain some more territory. So because white's not afraid of this for now, sometimes white would play the 3-space. Because after the 3-space extension, if black were to ever Kosumi, then this would be a more comfortable shape. Right? Typically when you have 2 stones that stands up from the 3rd line, you want to make a 3-space extension. If you make a 2-space extension, then after the kick, this is considered a little slower. So that's again reasons for playing the 3-space extension. But nowadays a lot of players like the 2-space extension more. And that's because even with the 3-space extension, with 2 stones, the invasion is still a very annoying weakness. For example, black might invade to make this hane and connect sente. Although this makes white very strong, you can see black gain quite a bit of territory here in the corner. So the main difference between the 3-space and 2-space is that the 3-space extension gets a little more, but has a weakness later, while the 2-space extension gets a little less, but it's a strong, solid shape that doesn't have any obvious weakness for the time being. So this is kind of the type of moves that players like to play in the recent times, is to have one move to fix all the problems. Now, this is not the best example of that, but recently I've seen a lot of Q or low dan players that like to get stronger, and this is one of the things that they might be missing, is that sometimes when you play shapes that require protecting later, then it's hard to be efficient because you will give your opponent stones in other areas of the board, which will make them more efficient. So that's, I guess, the deal with these, and also the reason why most pros like to play the 2-space extension now. So, okay, so the difference between Kosumi and Knight's move. The Knight's move is more efficient, obviously. The shape is further away, which allows black to control more of the side. The Knight's move, though, has two drawbacks. One of them being that the corner is weaker, so white tanukis are play elsewhere. The Pincer isn't very severe anymore because white could attach and double hane and exploit the weakness of the c4 stone right now. It's easier for white to make this stone alive, which means it's not really afraid of any attack. So typically after white tanukis, if black wanted to follow up in this area, black would play the Kosumi instead from the corner. The second drawback is the Pincer. When you have a fourth line stone that gets pincered by a third line stone, it's very uncomfortable because you don't want to kick, because kicking makes white a lot stronger. But if you don't kick, the slide in is a very comfortable move for white to get both territory and eye shape away from black. So if black tanukis again, then white can take away the corner and make an attempt to attack this black group. So playing efficient obviously has some of the drawbacks, but it really depends on your style of play. Now, almost all of the AIs prefer the Knight's move over the Kosumi, purely for efficiency and fast play, but the Knight's move is harder to control. So, purely personal preference, but yeah, these are pretty much relatively similar. So, a follow-up after the Knight's move is the Kosumi, and a follow-up for the Kosumi is usually the 2-space Pincer. Okay, with that out of the way, let's spend a bit more time talking about Pincer moves. So, before, with the low approach, you see a lot of the time black either pincers or ignores. For example, in a lot of games, black would just simply defend the other corner or do an approach or an extension. Now, AlphaGo showed us that after white presses this group down, AlphaGo thinks white benefited from these exchanges, and one, it pushes black into the third line. White has potential influence in forcing moves, and also this attachment is very good at taking the corner. So, for those reasons, AlphaGo thinks you should play the Knight's move to prevent this attachment. The reason why the attachment works is if you were to hane, white could push and cut. Normally, black would atari to capture the stone, but you can see now that after the cut in Sente, white could just simply atari to capture these stones. And if black pushes and pushes, white could simply block, push, and extend. Or, sorry, I got the order wrong. White should push first, and then block. And if black ataris, then white can extend. And for similar reasons, the cutting weakness now puts black into a lot of trouble. If black has to connect back, then black didn't really gain much from all of those exchanges. Instead, black lost even more in the corner. And if black ataris, then white can actually counter atari. And this is a trap that black fell into. So the attachment works, it helps take the corner. So black shape is uncomfortable. So to prevent that, black can play a nice move. Now, this is the types of moves that are really hard to master because, in the opening, we were taught to play third and fourth line moves. So second line moves are conditional and they're circumstantial. And, you don't want to be playing moves in the second line typically. So, if you get into a situation like this, most pros play the jump, but if you want to play the knight's move, go ahead and give it a shot. So that's really what AlphaGo taught us, and for similar reasons, the pincers that are further away are less common these days because white could choose a variation like this. Now, one of the older joseki variations would go something like this. And black sacrifices the corner territory to take influence in the upper area. Now, this influence is not very good because it has two very clear forcing moves. So white could use these to reduce the upper side very easily. So of course white wouldn't do these now, but these can be used. For example, if white invades, then it's very easy to gain eye space on the upper side. So in this case, this is considered good for white. And then the pincers that are further away are less common because when you have a stone that's far away, it doesn't really help as much when you start a fight. Right? The closer this pincer stone is to the white stones, the more it'll help in this fight. So that's why only the closer pincers now are available. So we have high pincers here. Now, for the similar reasons, if black crawls, then it's considered a bit better for white. So typically now you have to push and cut and start the fight. Now, the details of this fight is very, very complicated. And I won't go into too much detail here, but typically white will block, hane, and then atari and jump. Okay, and the rest of the fight is relatively complicated. It depends on black wants to either extend, jump, or block here. These are all possible moves. So if you're black, I urge you to try it. It's actually quite fun how the fight turns out, but it's very hard to grasp because there are a lot of things that depend on each other. Right? So if you extend and then cut, this corner requires quite a bit of reading to actually understand. And if black jumps, then typically white will Kosumi jump. So it will end up into both living shapes. So I think this was on the AlphaGo Teach variation. But this is very hard to understand because actually the next move block Tanuki is in play elsewhere. So from what I understand, currently there is no set conclusion about the push and cut. So still a lot to explore for us. Now, even with the closer pincer move, sometimes white will play here for a lot of AIs. So even though you can see clearly that after this variation, there's a cut. But still, a lot of AIs like to play the knight's move, even if black pincer is very close. So what does this mean for us is that typically the pincer will give you a fight after white plays the knight's move. The one-space pincer, white can also start a fight in other ways. And so in conclusion, what we learned about this 3-4 and low approach is that we have a few ways to respond. For those of you that are the fighting style and like to develop on the right side, then you would choose a pincer move, either a 2-space or a 1-space pincer. Now the high pincer will help more with the knight's move than the low pincers, because they will threaten the cut. If you want to play simpler variations, if you want to give white an extension on the right side, then this is a good way to take sente. If you are more of if you want to develop on the upper side, then you would play either the knight's move or the Kosumi. So the knight's move is more efficient. So if you were more of a more aggressive player and you like to play fast and more efficient and deal with weaknesses later, then you would play the knight's move. If you're more solid and step-by-step style, then you would play the Kosumi here. So these are pretty much the variations that I want to talk about. The low approach has been quite popular these days with the 3-4 point. This concludes my video on the 3-4 point low approach variations. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'm sure you can use at least 1 or 2 of these variations in your own games. If you like my videos, make sure you comment, rate, and subscribe, and make sure you check out the first video on the 3-3 invasions. So, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.